Hello, and welcome to the Remembering and Re-Enchanting podcast. My name is Sara Jolena Walcott, and I am your hostess on this sacred learning journey of unraveling, unveiling, and becoming more fully alive at the end of the world as we know it. In this podcast, we offer up to you, dear listener, 3 forms of episodes to support your journey of remembering and re-enchanting. First, conversations with amazing people. Second, storytelling. And third, myth casting. In this episode, we're going to bring you a conversation between myself and another amazing, fascinating leader in the areas of remembering and re-enchanting.
Yay! I'm so excited we're doing this.
Me too. Thank you.
Yeah. I think like the goal is to just be like really with each other.
Okay. Yes. Continue a conversation.
To continue a conversation.
Yeah.
So let's just start. I might not put it in exactly this way, but you could just start by introducing yourself.
Okay. Well, my name's Aubrey Chaves, and I co-host a podcast called Faith Matters. And I love talking about big questions around faith. So I'm excited to learn from you.
Oh. Well, I'm excited to have this conversation. We were talking yesterday. We're at the Faith Spirituality Podcast Summit. We were having a water cooler conversation.
That's exactly what
Except it was with sugar, because that's what happens here apparently in Salt Lake City and Utah. Is a lot of sugar.
We're sweet. We're too sweet.
Oh my God, there's so much sugar. And we were talking, and I was talking a little bit about, I'm going to bring us back to that moment a little bit so that we can kind of continue the conversation.
Okay.
And we were talking about this work that I do around remembering and re-enchanting. And I was describing how important it is, like as we're listening for that question about how God is working and speaking to us in our lives, and how to hear the divine in our lives and how to interpret that. Like part of what's really important is to understand our lives, which is to say our shared life in this great big river of time. And that river of time goes deep into the past and deep into the future, and like is only ever present in the present. It's all those, right? That's like the way time is a very multidimensional and sometimes bizarre thing. And that as we to situate ourselves and to understand our histories, to understand where we come from, helps us understand what's happening now and how we can respond to that. And so I was describing like how the past is in the present in ways that are often unexpected and often surprising. And then you told me a story.
Yeah, and it was this really beautiful moment of synchronicity, because this is so much on my mind, but I have no experience here, and it's something that I was literally, talking to my family about all the way on my drive to be in this place that you are. And it was so strange that we're wrestling with this experience with our history feeling very present, and then all of a sudden you're putting such beautiful language to this thing that is so new to us, and it just felt like the very next step. Like you were bringing to me some direction that I could feel my soul just really reaching for without much of a compass. And so maybe if it's helpful, I can just tell you, I can repeat a little what we talked about. But just a few days ago, it feels like hours ago, a few days ago, I have been feeling actually for months just super interested in my family, like deep family and family stories and ancestry. And I've just felt this drive to know who my mothers are, like to see their faces and know where they came from and feel connected to them. And so, and it has been intense. And it's been really fun. I feel it's like kind of been a little bit of an obsession. I just feel like I have to know these people. And so I've been really digging into my ancestry, and I'm a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And and there is a real value around this connection, but it's never really spoken to me until recently. But we have a lot of tools for following our family lineage and knowing our ancestors. And so I was just doing a lot of digging on Family Search and Ancestry, and I've done like the DNA testing, and so I was following stories that and memories that other descendants of my ancestors have posted online. And it's been such a cool experience to see photographs I've never seen, and to see scanned journals and stories that other people have submitted that they remember about grandparents. And I don't know the descendants, but we share these ancestors. And so there's just this rich library of information. And I felt especially drawn to one grandmother who I didn't know very well. I didn't know her in person. So she would be my great-great-grandmother. And I knew my great-grandmother. And I felt a lot of curiosity, like, who was her mother? And so I started reading about this great-great-grandmother and stumbled over this story that I had never heard before, and that my mom had never heard before. And it was just kind of like it was something that got buried intentionally, I think, because there was a lot of shame. But because of the internet, and because we now share this resources with other descendants of hers, the stories sort of bubbled up, and I all of a sudden was sucked into this world that I didn't know existed. And I was floored because it made it so real that I think it felt like opening a door that made my own life make sense. Like things that I have really struggled with, and that I'm very conscious of, and that I've spent endless hours talking with my sisters about and with my mom about, and just exploring things like the struggle to develop a healthy sense of self, and like this real resistance to just being authentic and saying no when you want to say no, and recognizing what you genuinely want. Like we have all had this real struggle with being able to find access to that. And that's something we're so aware of. And it's something that didn't make sense to me. Like based on my childhood and my life, I don't understand why I struggle with that, because
why you struggle
with finding a sense of self,
finding your own sense of self.
Yeah.
For
like
yourself.
I feel like my memories from childhood, my parents were so encouraging. Like they wanted me to develop a self, and they encouraged my creativity, and like I don't see trauma there. And so I didn't ever understand why I react this way. And I've had this strange experience this week, becoming familiar with this grandmother's story and realizing that my own pain makes so much more sense in the context of her life, and these weaknesses, and like this, and also this superpower of being able to see what people expect from me and intuit that makes so much more sense in her life. And and I don't understand that, but it has been just this roller coaster of feeling that I feel very connected to her. And also I feel like somehow it's making my own struggle with these things feel, it feels like she's holding them too. And so when you said, our history is present, I just thought, I don't understand that, but I am experiencing that right now. And we all are, and we're not really sure what to do with it, but it feels like something that I felt so drawn to finding, and it feels like there's healing that needs to happen. And I don't know what that looks like next, but I can feel how alive it is in my soul and in the soul of our family.
Right. So something happened to your great-great-grandmother. Now it's interesting, especially for people who are listening, what it was that happened both does and does not matter. Like the specifics, the specifics of what happened both does and does not matter. The shape of how your family responded matters a great deal, right? Oh, wow. So, like the understanding the specifics is for many people, like understanding the thing that happened is like super helpful, right?
Yeah.
And because it helps you understand the patterns that happen later. Yeah. And like, so when I'm teaching the remembering course, which is about big. It's not about the individual story or the individual family. It's about the big social, cultural, ecological, economic stories. When people understand the nature of what happened in the bigger cultural level, it helps them see, oh, this is why we have these patterns of this is the truth we tell and this is the truth we don't tell, for example. The patterns of lies or the patterns of hiding or the patterns of shadows, like the patterns make sense when you understand the thing that happened. But in sometimes like just knowing that something happened, and just a story from my own life on that, like I know something happened to my father before he was 5, but I don't know what it was.
Oh, wow.
But I can tell from the shape of his life and the shape of his siblings' life and the shape of like just things that happen, the way they happen. I'm like, okay, like I know that some stuff happened that wasn't quote unquote okay, right? And I know what happened before he was 5. And there's been a lot of like collaborative evidence from other people who knew him when he was small. Not necessarily relatives. We were in a community, right? So it's not just family members.
Yeah.
And that shaped, other things in his life that happened afterwards. And I will never know that, because lots of times we never know what happened. There's so many times in family histories and personal histories, even for ourselves, where we don't always know exactly what happened. So you got that fortunate experience of like figuring out like, oh, this is the thing. Right? This is the thing that happened to your great-great-grandmother, right? And so that's 4 generations back.
Yeah, so my grandma, her mother, and it would be her mother. Yeah.
Right. So it's 4 generations back. Something happened when your grandmother was younger.
An adult.
Something happened when she was an adult. And that led to a pattern of behavior, especially amongst the women. Is that what you're saying? Is it also men or mostly amongst the women? Amongst the women, that has to do with, what I'm hearing you say is like that has to do with people not, women not kind of knowing who they are. Yeah. Are there other aspects of that pattern that you feel comfortable sharing? You don't have to.
Yes. Yeah. I think it also shows up as sort of this like general shame and guilt orientation in the world, like this, and it might be connected to this feeling of needing to hide what's true or hide what's who we genuinely are. Like maybe there's this feeling of needing to protect what is the truest thing about us, and I think how that shows up is this feeling of like losing access to that, like not even being able to find it, like getting really good at overriding genuine desires, that you sort of lose access to that internal sense of authority and instead develop this reflex to defer to somebody else in an effort to keep the peace or not rock the boat, or just I think it just feels like there's this sense that there's not bandwidth to be real.
There's not bandwidth to be real. And so then so the next question is always like, do you see those same trends or patterns in families similar to yours in your like neighborhood or in your church?
That's interesting. Yes.
Oh, how interesting. You see some similar patterns.
Yeah. And I that's a really interesting question, actually. I do see that. I think that the history of our church is actually pretty traumatic all by itself, and especially traumatic for women. Just the Mormon pioneers were basically chased across the United States. Like they never had a safe place to be, and even once they got to Salt Lake, it was scary. Like people thought at any moment that the U.S. military was coming. There was not a safe haven. And then I think,
is there kind of like a narrative of being persecuted?
Yes, certainly, and it was a reality for the earliest saints when the church was new, and so there's something about that, I think, but also it is an explicit patriarchy, and we have this history of polygamy in the early church, and it's hard to know how that played out in individual lives in the early church, but in the journals of my own family, what I see is just this experience of women feeling a revulsion, like feeling like their they're feeling like a no, like the deepest no to this thing. And then this, with this contrasting conviction about wanting to be good. And so overriding the no and saying yes.
Oh, wow.
To be good, like to do, because I think and of course, I'm not speaking for the women of the church, but for the women whose journals I have access
you've read.
to.
Yep. That's all we can talk about in this one. Yeah.
It's this experience of actually believing that God is asking something of them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Take your time.
And
no, it's emotional. It is. Like, it's real, right? You can feel them. You've read it. You've read their journals. Yeah. And you've read their like authentic spiritual quest and trying to be faithful and trying to be close to God.
Yeah. So this question of like, does it come up in the community is interesting because I do feel like I'm not sure where it comes from. I see how it would make sense in my own family line. This tendency to basically start believing that your genuine wants and needs are a problem or are at their root wrong, because there was this for so many of them. I mean, it's not so many. It was basically 2 generations who lived in these marriages, but they talk about these moments of they would have said no, but it must be right because they're being told that this was revelation. Mm-hmm. And so in a genuine effort to be righteous, to be good, they say yes to these marriages and they make it work. And they really make it work. Like they live out the rest of their lives in these situations that must have been so incredibly difficult. And because it was new, it was not something that their mothers and their mothers and their mothers had done. It was like this new way of doing a family, and they genuinely believed that it was something they had to do, that they needed to do to be good, to be right with God. And I see how that took such a that so much will to ignore what they wanted, mm-hmm. and in this effort to do what God said. And so that kind of makes sense to me. But I think also in the community over the 200 years that it does seem like there's very often, and this is certainly not always the case, but that there are women who feel like it doesn't come natural to them to take up space and to have their own insights and feel some conviction around teaching them and exploring them. And I think that I think you could say that it's a common issue for women to feel like they're trying hard to learn to stop deferring always to someone else's authority. And it's a hard balance, because I think in the church there is this genuine testimony, like this belief that keeps you here, that is like, this is a good place for your soul. And so you're sort of navigating, how do you both claim and own and validate your internal authority while respecting and trusting someone else's authority. And it does seem like that's something that women are actively navigating in our community. So it's hard for me to see. I don't know how that connects. And I guess that wasn't really your question, but like, yeah, I see that. I see this issue. I see women wrestling with it in my community.
Well, it's such a it totally connects. What you're sharing is so connecting, and like so in the case of your individual, and thank you for your vulnerability, and thank you for your tears, and I thank you. I like to think that your ancestors appreciate you right now. Sharing this. And being willing to look at it, willing to look at them, and to see your grandmother's suffering, and to see their will, as you say, right? Like how much it took for them, and you're really acknowledging that.
Thank you.
And seeing that there's a particular kind of strength, a particular kind of power. Not saying it's right or wrong. I'm not trying to go into that, right? But just to acknowledge how much it took for them to live into that life in their desire to be, as you say, good.
Thank you. And something you said yesterday that I've been thinking about so much is that what feels very top of mind to me is the pain. But I appreciated something you said yesterday about this fact that that's not all that is passed on, and that like this, whatever that was, this courage, this like intense power of will, there's another side to this story that required a lot of strength, and that's here too. And I'm not sure I've had eyes to really see that yet.
Yeah, well, you're in the middle of it. We're having this conversation a few days after you found something that your great-great-grandmother experienced, which you can see how a lot of subsequent social patterns within your family make sense. Within the women in your family make sense if you see this particular thing. And in this conversation, we're also talking not just about your own personal family line, but the larger social and community and cultural context, which might have reinforced some of that, or which might have had...
That is so... I think that's a really good way to put it.
So there's something in the individual family line, but then there's something in the larger community or cultural that is interacting, right?
That's holding it.
That's holding
supporting it. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's like kind of not necessarily pushing against it, to put it like sweetly, like right? But that's like letting it kind of keep happening in a way that maybe in another cultural, social context it might not have. And frankly, it also might have. Sometimes, like, there's some of what you're talking about as someone who has worked with people from multiple faith communities is in that what does it mean to listen to your own personal or individual authority, spiritual messages that you're receiving from the holy ones, and what does it mean to abide by the tradition that you're working within, right? That tension and continue in Quakerism, we talk about continual revelation, right? God is continually revealing him and themselves to us, right? So like, it's not like we know that there's not a set rules, that there's nothing else happening. But even those traditions where there are, it's like there's like tradition, the nature of tradition is that it keeps changing. But it also has to kind of stay the same because it's tradition. And so that tension is existing in every religion that I am aware of. And that question of how much individual and how much collective and how much like doctrine, like by which I mean following the rules that have been written down or in some way indoctrinated, are you engaging with, and are you following an attempt to faithfulness? Like many, many traditions have that. Have that tension.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, well, it makes a lot of sense. So some of what you're experiencing is not about this particular, this only, it's not only within this community. It's something that I think is in many different communities, especially communities with a high level of, I don't know if that would I don't know if the word control would resonate with you, but a high level of like, this is how we do things. Yeah.
I mean, the church was so young. I think there was definitely just so much energy around their commitment. Like it was the anchor of their lives in a way that it isn't the anchor of my life, but I think that for them, it was
it defined who they were.
It absolutely defined who they were, and it defined where they lived and when they lived, and or when they lived where. Like I could see how there was an intensity there that I don't experience all these years later. And I also wonder, in the 1930s, just the experience of women in the United States probably supported this experience for her.
Let's say yes and no. Like I think that there was a concentration of what you're describing at that time in this place that was probably more than in some other places, because of all these other factors, and in part. But like women's suffrage doesn't is very late, and it's later than we think it is in the United States, and we forget often for how many generations American women and before white American women and before them European women did not have were property of their were legal property of their husbands in the European history for quite really a long time, really, and we forget that.
Yeah,
we forget that,
yeah.
and it was not true for Indigenous women, and it was not who were here and part of this continent before the Europeans got here. Indigenous women were not property of their husbands, and it was one of the things the colonizers and particularly the missionaries would write home about some of the most was how shocked they were at how much freedom the women had.
Wow.
And that they could just throw the husbands out or throw the men out if they felt that the men were misbehaving or like really not treating the children well or something.
Wow.
Then and that was upheld by the community. Like if they weren't treating the children well, they didn't stay.
Wow.
And a woman had a right to do that whenever she wanted to because she was understood to be the holder of the family.
Oh, that's so interesting. And I just can't imagine the way that would sort of feed this. It would feel like an invitation to explore whatever your connection is to some higher wisdom. It would really feed and validate this connection that you experience. It instead of the impulse to ignore it, I'm sure you would
to your own internal spiritual connection to the divine. Yeah. Right. If your community is supporting your instincts and saying, "Oh, like if supporting your voice and supporting your authority in kind of social ways, right? In terms of like how a marriage is constructed or how livelihood is happening, then within your own heart." You can hear things. You actually have to hear things better. You have to pay attention to what you're knowing within yourself.
Wow.
Because so much rides on it.
Yeah.
Right? And that's not the experience that your immediate family members had. Although again, we want to, and I think I think you're lifting up something really important, right? So we talk the larger society, we're understanding more and more intergenerational trauma and the way that trauma is passed down through families. And I'm careful in how I use that language, and that there are some things we know, like we have genetic evidence about how certain types of trauma is passed down, say from the Holocaust in Jewish communities, from the genocide in Native American communities and boarding school stuff in Native American communities. We can see some of the patterns genetically, biologically, as well as in cultural, what happens within a family and raising, right? Because it's both nature and nurture. So we know scientifically and culturally and anthropologically, and so both in social science and hard science, that there is a way in which trauma is passed down. We also know, and that let me rephrase that. We have spent much less time, because this is still, like, really from a scientific perspective, I think intuitively we've known this for a long time. From a scientific perspective, this is very recent knowledge. So we haven't, science, which is, has its own challenges, right? It's not a perfect thing. Science has not yet had a chance to really look into the question and has not prioritized the question, how is courage passed down?
Yeah.
Is courage passed down genetically? Yeah. Is resilience also genetic? Is strength or the ability to, as you say, to have a strong will, to say, I'm going to do what this, even though this hurts, I'm going to do it anyway. Because what I see as a higher value in this moment, or because of social pressure, because maybe they don't have a choice. But I'm actually hearing this kind of like uncomfortable choice.
Right.
They had some agency. It wasn't that they didn't have any agency. They weren't being forced into the marriage.
Yes. And I don't think about that very often, but that is completely true. This
was not a forced arranged marriage.
No.
They had some degree of agency in it. Is that accurate?
I would need to think about it more, because I have always thought of it like they were compelled. Like there would have been enough social pressure that they should say yes. But I'm not sure how. Maybe that is a little dismissive. I'm not. I don't know. Like I feel like they were wrestling. And they made a choice. And so
right. It's very so this is one of those places where agency is hard to determine sometimes,
right.
Because if you're getting that much social pressure, do you have choice?
Right.
Like,
but it's something I'm interested in exploring, and I haven't spent a lot of time there because the pain of like what I imagine in those situations feels so intense. But I think that's a fruitful place to think, like to really consider, because I'd hate to dismiss. I'd hate to assume that it felt like coercion to them, because I don't feel like that's the way they wrote about it. And it was probably really nuanced, and but I do sense that they recognized they were doing a hard thing and they were choosing it. They were choosing it anyway. And there was definitely some amount of will there that was incredibly powerful. And I'll probably never know.
Yeah. And, this is a place where there's different, like from, academics and who think not about LDS particularly, but just in general about religious communities and the pressure and social pressure to do certain things in religious communities. Where is individual agency? Where is it social pressure? What is abusive coercion? What is, people doing what they think is right? And it's not. I think some of these spaces are fuzzy, and and this is a space where I don't quite know which one's which all the time either.
Yeah.
And there's some people who I know who I think are more deep into this than I am, and I'd be very curious what they would say. But to recognize that social pressure is huge, and we are deeply social creatures. We deeply need and want to belong, and to not doubt to not underestimate the power of that social pressure. And
I love what you, just before you move on, like I love what you said about recognizing the shape of your family patterns.
Yes.
And that's really interesting, because I'll never know.
Okay. Yeah, no.
I'll never know. But like what is a reality is the shape.
Yes. Exactly. Because does it matter how much what we name it today? Sometimes it's helpful to have different frameworks, and sometimes I like to go between different frameworks. But then as you're what's the shape today?
Yeah.
And as you're listening and you're growing your own inner authority, what shape are you working within yourself, and what is the shape within yourself as well as within the family and the social relationships that you're showing up for?
Do you know what's so interesting? It's so interesting to talk with you, because you're coming, like I talk with people within this tradition a lot.
Yeah.
And it's so interesting to be in conversation with you, with your sensitivity, but also with like your fresh eyes. Like this is a new story, and it's not a story that is painful for you. And so it's really a gift. So just thank you. And and it's also, I feel like somehow being in conversation is giving me fresh eyes too. It's helping me sort of like step back and see it from a little bit of a different perspective. And what feels very clear to me right now is that part of this shape, part of what it feels like, is this intense anxiety around the expectations of the culture. And I wonder how much of that is just because I don't feel like I have I feel underdeveloped in this ability to protect myself with agency. Like I feel like it's really hard to just like be super mad, and it's really hard to just say no because I don't want to. And so I think what I trade is just this intense feeling of anxiety, because it does feel like whatever the expectations are means something for my life. Like it means something about what I have to do. And I wonder how much of that is just that it's like my nervous system totally recognizes that I'm not going to protect myself by just saying no. And so it's just like, I feel sort of
Was
like
your
at the whim.
great-grandmother unable to say no to something?
She didn't say no. So, yeah.
And she wanted to say no to something.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But I wonder, like, what it feels like the hardest thing for me now, like in my experience, the thing that I've been excavating for decades is just like, why is anxiety the feeling, like the instant feeling when a request is made or when expectations are sensed, or I think those are the two things. Like sometimes it's not even that a request is made; it's just like the feeling in the air that I'm aware of. I answer that with anxiety, and it would make sense to me that it could be because I feel like it means I have to comply. And I wonder if I was more able to stay really grounded in what I actually wanted and trust myself to stay aligned with that intent. I wonder if like my nervous system could relax, because it makes sense that there is danger there. Like there's danger about having to comply when you don't know what's coming.
So this danger is there danger in either situation? Like if you comply when you don't know what that actually means and you're not sure what that means, that sounds like it could be a dangerous situation.
Yeah.
And if you don't comply, if you say no, is that also dangerous?
It feels dangerous in my body.
Like it feels
dangerous.
Like not saying yes feels dangerous.
Yes. Yeah, it does. Which
saying
is
no
one of those
feels
things
dangerous.
like why I don't know why that's how it feels to me.
So first, just to recognize, like, like just to kind of take a moment to just like recognize what it to live in a state of feeling like whether you're saying yes or you're saying no, it feels, as you say, anxious, and that there might be some danger, possibly, whichever choice you take. And if you're looking at, if people are asking you things explicitly or implicitly, because you're an adult person wandering through the world, people do, right? People ask us things all the time. It's just part of what it means to be here. And you don't feel that either your yeses or your nos are safe for you. You don't know if they're safe. That I could see how that not sure if either yeses or nos are going to lead you to a place of being okay.
Yeah.
For yourself, in your own body, in your own life. Of course that would lead to anxiety.
Yeah.
Of course they would be anxious. And if you have a family history of women not, in this case we're talking about women, and I'm sure it's not just women, but we're talking about women in this moment, of women not being sure if they can say yes or they can say no, or if it's going to be safe if they say yes or safe if they say no. Is that something your sisters or your mother has talked about as well?
Yeah, I think we've all,
I don't want to assume, right?
I think they would all feel like this feels like an epiphany. We talk around this all the time. And, but I'm not sure I've ever put together that it actually, both are really painful. Both are hard.
Both are hard. That's what I'm hearing from you. I'm hearing from you that the yes is hard and the no is hard.
Yes.
For different reasons.
I always thought it was the no that was hard. But like the yes can be excruciating when you're overriding a no.
If you're overriding a no, yes is very hard.
Yeah.
It is hard. Yeah. Totally. Totally hard. And most humans do it much of the time.
Right.
Like I know plenty of people who like they do not want to go to work in the morning at that time. And they override that every day.
Yeah.
To go to work. Right. So and it actually, and then they get resentful. Right. And then, when a stereotypical man gets up early and goes to work, women's, kind of they come home, they're exhausted, and they've been saying maybe they need to rest that morning because they were like burnt out or whatever, and they don't. They come home and they get mad at their kids. Yeah. And they, yell at the dog or maybe they just need to like not talk to people because they've been overriding their no's all day long. That says like, I actually need to spend more time in bed. Like I need to not show up because I'm exhausted or whatever it is that's happening for them that day. And then of course I also want to acknowledge like, just sometimes you have to do what you have to do. And most of us have to do what we have to do, but there's like these consequences. Yeah. Right. And I get up early for things and like grumble all the time, but I'm also usually glad I showed up. Yeah. But
well, and I think there's a real difference between like, my higher self, like I don't want to get up, but my higher self genuinely does want to provide for my family or, show up and be dependable. But I think there are a lot of yeses that they feel like your genuine, highest, wisest self is a no. And and you say yes anyway. It's like that. I think those are the ones.
So it's not the grumpy yes. For distinguishing between different kinds of yeses and different kinds of nos. I'm talking about
like there is something inside of me that like this is not mine to do, and the answer is no. But somehow it comes out yes.
Right.
And I think that feels
Yes.
Those are the
now just to
those are
kind of
harmful, I
like stick
think.
into the somatics for a moment,
Okay.
because that can be really helpful in terms of realigning some of this stuff. So first, like recognizing this isn't just you. This is something that's not an individual thing. This is at least a family thing,
Mm-hmm.
at least a gendered thing,
Mm-hmm.
at least, and when I say at least, I mean probably more than that. I'm sure that men experience this too.
Yeah.
And that it's a social, cultural, there might be a larger social, we don't want to go too far into that, but like in this conversation, but like,
Yeah.
you know, just to, from the perspective of one woman talking to another woman in this conversation, we can recognize that there's these different pathways and these different ways of patterns that is not just you. Within your own somatic experience of yourself, do you know what the no feels like?
What a no, like an aligned no
An
feels like
aligned
when I
no.
feel like it's a no in my body. It
Do you know what
feels
that
like,
feels like?
yeah. Well, and I want to tell you
Yeah,
that,
yeah.
but can I tell you also
Yeah.
really quickly, like the very first, I went to like my very first therapy appointment probably like 8 or 9 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And it was because I felt so disconnected from my body. I realized I couldn't tell when I was hungry. Like if I was with a group of people and they all said that they were hungry, I genuinely felt the physical feelings of hunger. And if the group changed their mind, they completely went away. Like I genuinely couldn't tell which camp I was in. Like if I want to eat or do I not want to eat? I could like try on a thought and feel the experience of it. And I realized that was finally when I realized I don't think this is normal. Like something's wrong. I want to talk to someone. And so I don't know how this all comes back to disconnecting from body, but that has been like a very like conscious work I'm doing, because I feel like somehow the result of all of this stuff we're talking about has been that I have totally disconnected from the way emotions feel in my body.
Is it disembodiment?
Okay. Yes. Yeah. And yeah.
Yeah.
So I this is like something on my mind every day. And I think the best way I could describe a no is that it feels solid, and it feels like a sort of leaning away. Like I feel like I kind of get this whoosh of drained energy. Like it feels like something deep is pulling away from this thing.
Okay, and then what does a yes feel like?
And the yes is the exact opposite. It feels like a lightness. It feels like my feet are already moving in that direction. Like my body is moving toward this thing. And it feels like literal energy. Like I feel like I'm less tired. Like it's like moving me and not in a buzzy, anxious way, but in like a moving up. Like it's lifting me up and moving me toward something almost in a physical way. Like I feel like I want to start this thing right now. Like it just is it's just like an intense like lunge forward for something. Or I maybe, and that's a big yes. I think sometimes just a yes, like a something that doesn't feel as intense, is still just this general sense of moving forward, like moving into something.
So, go you for the years it's probably taken to be able to articulate that right now.
Thank you.
And giving grace to God and praise to God for helping you and for your ability to be faithful in that, and working with God to help you know what your yes and your no feels like in yourself. Because I hear that that has not always been true for you.
Yeah.
And so congratulations for being able to share that. And you had a beautiful, beautiful somatic interpretation. I love the articulation you're giving. I can completely resonate with it. I'm sure.
I really appreciate that.
Yeah, it makes complete sense to me. I have, I'm like, oh yeah, I can, as you're saying that, I can feel some of that within my own body and with my own experience. And then, so when you have those kind of strong yeses or nos, where does this, how does the, so let's say when you're feeling yes towards something, is there also, is there always anxiety with it, or are there times when there's not anxiety with it?
Oh man, I mean, on the rare occasion where my yes aligns with what other
So the
people want,
anxiety
then
comes when it doesn't necessarily align.
yeah, I think it does.
So
Yeah, it for sure on both sides.
on
That's
both the yes
definitely.
and the no. The anxiety shows up based on how the people,
Yeah.
how your thoughts of how the other people around you
Yes.
are.
Yep. For 100%.
And if the yes, if you know for whatever reason that your own internal yes is more or less aligned with some social yeses,
Yeah.
it's easy.
Yeah. And I,
There's
and
not
like,
as much
it's like a
anxiety.
high. Yeah.
It's like a high.
Yeah.
Right. So how do we, and is there, I'm going to use the word theological, is there with that social yes or social no, does that have a moral quality to it? Or does that have like there's a sense of like the socialness that you're maybe family, maybe friends, maybe colleagues, right? That there's a sense of like the socialness knows something about divine will that maybe you do or don't.
Wow. I mean, that is the question I feel like I need to sit with for the next decade. Like that's it certainly feels like they're the same. Like the right thing to do is the same as the expectations.
Of people around you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
But that's interesting. Yeah. Like I somewhere like in my brain, I don't believe that, but it feels that way. So in fact, for years I didn't even use the word anxiety. I used the word guilt. Like I thought I was only ever experiencing guilt. I just like feel so guilty all the time. And then I started learning about anxiety and realized I think what I call guilt, the rest of the world is calling anxiety.
So it's not everybody. Lots of people still use the word guilt.
Okay. But like the way I would describe guilt is just like, oh yeah, if I'm reading about anxiety, that's called anxiety.
That's
but
so interesting.
But it definitely, this is the most interesting point you're bringing up because I'm not sure I've ever articulated that, but yeah, the reason I feel so anxious is because what I think I'm feeling is guilt because I'm saying no when it feels like the expectation is yes. It feels like a should. Like the right answer is that I should say yes. And if I'm going to stake out ground here and say no, I'm choosing something wrong, and so I feel guilty.
So I just want to acknowledge like some bigger theological pieces here. Like I think like what you're describing, we're just getting into so much of the heart of the confusion of being human, right? And like because we are deeply social beings.
Yeah,
we are not just individual selves, right? And so. In the Quaker tradition, we talk about an individual, like we recognize the limitations of an individual in engaging in discernment all by his or herself.
Oh, wow.
Which is to say, an individual one of the questions the Quakers are somewhat obsessed with within ourselves, within our own communities, is how, if God can speak to every person, which we believe that that happens, then how is it that the person knows which voice is the divine voice versus all the other voices out there? Yeah. Discernment of the spirits is one classic Christian way of talking about this. Yeah. Because we have lots of voices. We have the voice of ego. We have the voice of not so nice parts of ourselves, of our quote unquote lower selves, right? We have the voice of society of temptation. Right, the voices of temptation, which are we try to look at those squarely, and think about them carefully. I could say something about sugar in Utah, but let's just keep on the topic at hand. It's one of mine. It's definitely a temptation that I'm trying to avoid, but it's hard here. Yeah, but yeah. So like there's these different kinds of voices and we have the divine voice. Yeah, and then we have the like. Sometimes we just need to do the thing that looks like temptation in order to get to something else, right? Sometimes we need to like engage with the thing we want that we're not sure if it's okay or not. Yeah. To kind of understand which voice is which, or to go on our own pathway, right? Yeah. Because we don't always know, and other people don't always know. But anyway, so there's the idea that like the individual by him or herself is probably unlikely to kind of get it right all the time. Yeah. And if you're having big questions in life, then you probably do want to talk about those with other people, and you
Yeah.
don't want to just rely upon your own intuition all by yourself.
Yeah.
So we have clearness committees and discernment groups, and we have like all
Wow.
sorts of structures to help with collective decision making, to help an individual go through a collective decision making process
Wow.
for
And
their
find
own
that voice.
life, to
Yeah.
to help hear their own voices and to discern
Yeah.
which voice is which, right? So we have a whole process for that.
Wow.
And at the flip side of that is like no one else can tell you what to do for you.
Yeah.
Or as the scripture says, you know, the old songs say like you had to go to the valley of shadows, and you had to go there. There are some places only you can go, and only you can go alone.
Wow.
No one can live your life for you,
Yeah.
right? Someone else know what's best for you, you know?
Yeah. I mean, the thing that's coming up that's interesting to me is that I think I always believed that the voice of God was far away and outside of myself. And so it sort of reinforced this turning outside of myself, like not looking. I thought my inner voice was separate and less trustworthy. And so I was always like grasping for someone else who had a more solid connection to God's voice. And I don't know how I would even describe this theologically. What I have found experientially is that turning inward and learning to recognize what solidity feels like learning to recognize the feeling of my highest self making a choice. Like I just believe now that that's how God speaks to me.
And what helped you realize that? Because that's a huge shift.
I think I just realized that I can't discern between anxiety and guilt and all and so it was a prayer. Actually, I remember just saying to God, like I can't tell the difference. So it's gonna have to be a voice of peace, like deeply inside of me, because it's the only thing that that feels different than anxiety. And I think for my whole life, God's voice came from the same faraway place. Like this anxiousness was just so elusive, and because it was guilt, it was the voice of guilt. I thought God's voice was the voice of guilt. And so it was a prayer, like, you might be speaking this way, but I can't tell. And so I'm just going to ignore it. Like I can't, I believe that it's true that you're not the spirit of fear. And so I'm going to trust this thing that feels more solid and peaceful, that's really close to me, like it's inside. And I think as soon as I leaned into that, it just felt like I had a little bit more access to it. It didn't feel quite so hard to reach, and the fruit has been good. Like just choosing to believe that that's how God speaks to me has borne such better fruit than believing that this voice of guilt and fear from far away was God trying to steer my life. And so yeah, it was just out of desperation, choosing to trust that experience, and it's working so much better that I think I'm just gonna go with it.
And where do you feel that in your body?
It feels like still water.
It feels like still water. So you're pointing to your chest.
Yeah. It feels like something in the center of me that feels like still water, in the sense that it feels like there's depth there, and there's a calm that goes all the way down. And also, it just feels capable of holding something endless. Like it feels like the opposite of floating away in anxiousness and buzzing. Like that feels so much in my head, and my whole body feels jittery. And there is this other place that is cool and calm and so deep it can't be disturbed. And that's the thing I'm always trying to center on, I think.
And then do you have an image of a lake?
I've never thought about it, but I totally do. Yeah, I am.
Is it a little bit like the Salt Lake?
No,
curious.
It's not like the Salt Lake. The Salt Lake is a toxic,
visited the Salt
shallow.
Lake. Okay, never mind.
So, thank you.
So I thought
it's
it was
like
pretty.
Loch Ness. It's like deep Scottish.
Is your family from Loch Ness? Or is it from Scottish?
Do you have
Scottish
I have some. Yeah, I do. I have some ancestry from Scotland.
Have you been there?
Yes, actually, and it just feels like dark, not in a scary way, in like a calm. Just like so deep and ancient, and still. Yeah.
Deep, ancient, still. A lake surrounded by mountains, under stars and a moon, that's been holding boats and people and babies and carrying people for a long time. That kind of a lake.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Yeah.
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 So for some people, there's an actual physical location of a sacred site that resembles what you're talking about.
Really?
For some people. For other people, it's an inner image, is an interior landscape image.
Wow.
Right?
Yeah.
So when people talk about sacred sites, in addition to churches and buildings, right? But sometimes when people are talking about sacred sites, they're referencing that place where their soul can rest and peace and can be fulfilled and renewed, and where they visit that site, they feel their ancestors, they feel the connection to the heavens, and they feel the connections to the Holy One, and their soul can be renewed through that encounter with that location.
Oh my gosh, that is so beautiful. I've never heard that before, and I just, that lights me up. That's really beautiful.
So in the Christian, mystical traditions, or in like there's a lot of sacred sites, right, where the saints go.
Yeah.
Right. And you get this more in Catholicism than in Protestantism, because the whole throwing out the saints, which was kind of too bad in my opinion, but there you go. But like, I'm coming up from a Protestant tradition, so I can critique it. But like, saints would often have these, like, there's a lot of sacred sites where saints have been, and I know some women who say that the saints in those places, like with wells or springs or mountaintops, or caves, that those are places where they have encountered the Spirit. And of course, Jesus encounters the Spirit in the wilderness, right? He goes to meet his Father in the wilderness. Yeah. And again, there's a sort of recognition that, he goes to the wilderness because he needs to be fulfilled.
Yeah.
Right? Because it's kind of exhausting.
Yeah.
Right? As he's going amongst all the people and doing all the teaching and preaching, he also has to take the time to encounter, and the beasts gather around him, because the animals in that scene are so not just as they recognize Jesus, but also because we're all in communion together, human and animals together. So
wow, thank you. That was so beautiful. And is that how you would describe what healing looks like? Whatever was passed down, I don't know, when you see the shape of pain in your family, you see the shape of the patterns that you're continuing to live. What does healing look like? Oh,
that's such a profound question, that I think each family and each person is living that out in their own way, and asking in their own way, and stumbling towards not just walking, but sometimes falling down and bruising themselves on the way to that question. So I mentioned this to you yesterday. As you're in this moment, when you're just a few days, you're just in the very, very early stage, this precious early stage of seeing patterns and understanding patterns in your family. You're seeing them everywhere you go. Just the incredible importance of not pushing towards the answer and just letting it. It's like, I remember one time when I was a child and I was praying, and I heard what I felt was the voice of God, and it sounded like thunder in my mind. That's what it sounded like. And I was so excited. I jumped up and I ran, and half of my grandmother was visiting. I ran into the room to tell my grandma, I heard the voice of God and it sounds like thunder. And my grandma said, oh, what'd the voice say? And I realized I was getting so excited about the thunder that I didn't get to like what the voice said. Like, I'm like, just sounded like thunder. I'm like, and then she's like, keep praying. Like,
wow.
Right. It was such a wonderful like lesson from, such a powerful teaching. She didn't ridicule me. She didn't say like, oh, how weird you are, or like, oh, that's not God's voice.
Yeah.
Like, God doesn't sound like thunder. She didn't do anything. She's like, oh yeah, okay. Like, but what did God say? And I was like, so,
Wow.
but it's like in these early moments when you have, and the experience is so powerful, right? It's so somatically powerful of like, oh my God, these patterns are everywhere. And I was saying like, it feels tipsy turvy, right? Because, and like I can get into like the neurobiology of that, but like the somatic experience is tipsy turvy. And it feels like off kilter or wobbly often, right? You're kind of walking through life feeling wobbly.
Yeah.
And it's because it has to do with like how the mind and the body and the spirit connect and how conditions are formed. What it means. We're all conditioned. Everyone else is conditioned. That's normal. You have to really to survive.
Yeah.
So like there's nothing wrong with that. So, but in that early stage, to kind of just like be with it and to let the patterns keep coming, to let the insight keep coming, to let the revelations keep coming. And to keep praying and to because you're sharing, you have so fortunate to have such a beautiful family where you can talk about these things and you can share it with your mother and your sisters and others, and you're in a relationship, you're in a marriage where that can be supported, where your spouse is supporting you in like really meaningful, heartfelt, kind ways, right?
Yeah. And is the wobbly, when you say wobbly, is this just like you're experiencing emotions in your body that aren't necessarily obvious, like make obvious sense?
So my understanding of that wobbly thing, because this happens when people take my courses and they're looking at big histories, not just their family, but the bigger histories. The wobbly thing, there's lots of ways of thinking about it, but my current understanding with the wobbly thing is that the construct that has held you in one position has been unsettled. Okay. And now you don't actually know what your balance is. Yeah. It's like you were riding a skateboard or riding a scooter, and then suddenly when the wheels fell off. Yeah. And the scooter is the construct that your family, social, society system has given you to like ride through the street.
It's like
it's your internal script.
Yeah. Okay.
And then something got pulled out of that internal script. Maybe not the entirety of it, right? But this piece got pulled out. Yeah. Right. So when people look at the histories of colonization, it's actually unsettling. Wow. From a literal perspective, because oh, I thought this land was mine, and I don't know if it is now. Yeah. What does this mean? Yeah. If we stole this, if my ancestors stole this land, then what does it mean for me to have this house? Yeah. If property systems are all made up by the human imagination, what is do I own anything? Is ownership possible? If everything belongs to God anyways, like is ownership, what does it mean to sign like a contract? Because it's all God's anyway. Why am I even in a property system? Like that's so disconcerting. Yeah. It's so disconcerting that there's like this like wobbliness. And there's a period of time which, so far as I can tell, is somewhat inevitable where like you haven't put on the scooter hasn't had its wheel replaced. Yeah. Or you haven't figured out the other scooter you need to be riding. Or like, oh, I'm not going to ride a scooter for a while. Sense. I need to figure out how to walk again. Yeah. Yeah, I'm just going to walk for a while. And so
you're experimenting almost with new scripts.
Yeah, like experiment new scripts. Yeah, but you don't have the script yet. Right. And if you go to the new script too fast, you're going to replicate the old one, or you're going to replace it with someone else's script. Wow. Which is going to replicate the same thing over again. Yeah. So it's like, people get out of relationships and they get back straight into the same relationship. Yeah. Right. And like, you just left him. Why did you get into someone else who looks exactly the same? Yeah, that makes sense. Right? Because they haven't gone through their own process of actually changing the core beliefs within themselves. That's a psychological way of talking about this. Or in a more spiritual context, they haven't kind of been able to let God shape-shift themselves. Yeah. And I love what you said yesterday, and you're reminding me now that like once you've chosen to just be still in this really uncomfortable place, that eventually what happens is you start being able to see the pattern separate from yourself. Right. And I can, that makes sense to me. Like I do kind of feel like I'm in the eye of a hurricane. Yeah. Like you're around me. And that gives me a lot of hope that like at some point I will my wisest true self peels away and I can see the thing. So we're going to go back to the lake. Yeah. So part of, and I said to you, I was mentioning to you before, and it's so important to repeat it as often as necessary. Keep praying. Yeah. Right? in this moment of wobbliness, to kind of go closer to God in it. And even though you're not, and you have the fortune that not everyone has of having already have a sense of that internal God and the internal spirit. So you don't have to only look to the outside, scary, fear-based God. You already have got that skills. You already have some practice in relating to a non-fear-based experience of the divine, the peace that you're talking about, that peace voice. You know, it's like wherever, you know, the still small voice, right? The scripture talks about that. The still small voice, that quiet lake. So the more time you spend there in prayer, in you know, maybe for some people's meditation, that can be really helpful. And to kind of, how can you speak and work and act from that place, which is freaking impossible when you're just trying, when you're starting out, right? But like, okay, like probably if you don't do, you're currently not in a context where, so far as I know from what you've said, that if there's a dissonance between your internal no and or internal yes, and the expectations of the social group around you, they're probably not going to kick you out, and they're probably not they're probably not going to banish you. You're not going to be sent into the mountains around here without food and water, which has happened in some points in time. Men and women have faced that, right? So like, that is a human fear. We fear being banished from our communities, and here in Utah, like, you know, like those mountains and deserts are right there, and they're real and they're scary. So most likely they're not going to banish you out. And in the case of our current culture, if you, and not, you know, no saying anyone should leave their community, but if they had to leave their community, there are other communities for them to go to.
You're not actually, it's not life or death.
It's not life and death, right? And like there are people who leave communities of all kinds, and create new communities and thrive. And have very happy lives. So like, to kind of, but you know, that social anxiety - guilt thing that you're describing, I love how you talked about how those two things go together. It's such I think you really revealed something very powerful and beautiful about the human experience in that, and how that works, right? But to deepen into your own quiet lake, and to have help, and the more your family can learn how to pray together in a way that strengthens collective peace.
Oh, I love that.
Right? Your inner peace, but also your peace as a family. Right? Like the
That's
more
healing.
Something else can start showing up. Right?
That's so beautiful.
The more something else can start showing up.
Thank you so much. This has been, you've drawn out of me things that I think when you speak it, you know, when you say it, when you actually have to put words to an experience, it's like it gives you, it just feels like a really important step. Like it has to become concrete enough that you can see it, and that feels like holy work. So
it is, so much. It is, and like this is why we do this, right? This is why we don't just rely upon our own heads. And we don't,
that makes sense.
And we don't just rely upon people who are exactly like us, or who are in our. I'm very blessed that I have many mentors and many people in my community who are not like me and who think differently than I do. And who can poke at my partners from a different culture and community than I am. And, you know, she points out stuff all the freaking time. It just drives me nuts. But
we need it.
We need it, right? I'm grateful for it. I'm grateful for it. I'm grateful for the differences. And I too have struggled with, you know, what does it mean to, what is my own voice versus what is my thoughts of other people's expectations of me? Right? Or my thoughts of what does it mean to be a good, faithful, spiritual person. And like the more leadership I take on, the more public space I take in, or the more people I support, the more stressful that can become. Intensifies it, right?
That makes sense.
Because, you know, all of us want to walk our talk. And all of us want to make sure that whatever we're saying is coming from a place of love and not a place of fear.
Well, thank you for helping me have clearer eyes about that. I think we have to wrap up.
We're done.
I really like this.
Well, thank you, and thank you for your vulnerability and your sharing and your kindness, and the attention you're taking to yourself and the incredible journey that has enabled you to have this conversation, which a lot of people can't do. And for your willingness to share with others. I hope it's helpful for other people as well. And, just giving grace and gratitude and appreciation to the Holy Spirit within you, and how the Holy Spirit is moving in your life, and in your family's life, and the healing that may your ancestors experience greater healing, and may you and your family experience greater healing. And may there be like really aligned yeses and really aligned nos that are just filled with joy.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much. What a beautiful prayer.
Thank you so much for listening to the Remembering and Re-enchanting podcast. If you are enjoying what you are hearing, please subscribe, share, and leave us a review. I am always happy to hear from you, dear listener, to continue finding ways to connect the disconnected and go deeper on your own journey of remembering and re-enchanting with your communities, your organizations, and your families. I invite you to check out our courses and other community offerings via the Sequoia Summit Via website. You can also follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn. Though I must admit I spend much more time working with really amazing people than crafting social media. If you want to work with me one-on-one or bring me to speak at your organization or family office, you can find out more at sarajolena.com.